Hey guys, hope you're doing well. Scott here, and today I'm bringing you a different kind of video. Now, up until this point, my videos have focused on my pickups, my vintage action figure hauls, the additions that I make to my collection. But today's video is actually going to focus on how I display that collection. Now, ever since I got back into collecting toys and vintage pop culture items, I've always wanted to have a dedicated room that I display that collection in. Now, up until this point, I haven't really had the opportunity. But a couple of months ago, I moved into a new apartment, and when I was searching for that new home, I really made it a priority to look at apartments that had either a sort of a home office or study, or affordable apartments that had a spare bedroom. And in this apartment that I moved into earlier this year, I was lucky enough to have a really functional study area. And today I'm taking the first step in turning that study into a collection room. A room where I can display my collection of vintage action figures and other vintage pop culture items from the 80s and 90s. So I've just picked up a nice new display unit, and this afternoon we're going to start the process of getting the collection out of the plastic tubs and into the display unit. Now, this is just the first step in decking that room out. I've got a vision of how I want it to look. I'm gonna need multiple shelving units and display units to get it all how I'd like it and to display everything that I want to display. So this video is just part one of that process, but I'm excited to get into it. So what we'll do is we'll go into the next room. I'll show you how the room looks now. I'll show you the display unit that I've picked up. Then I'll get to work, and whether it's later today or tonight or later in the week, I'll show you how it's looking once I'm happy with it. So let's go in the next room and we'll check it out. So we're walking down my hallway toward my study. There's my display unit that I've just picked up, so we'll take a closer look at that in a moment. But here it is, guys. Here's the study, the future collection room. Now there's the state of everything at the moment. Just a big pile of boxes and plastic tubs. Take a closer look at what we've got. So we've got a bunch of loose figures here all bagged up. So we've got a bit of a mix here. We've got some Hasbro Wwf figures. We've got some Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, some Ghostbusters, some other odds and ends. We have carded figures in here, some Jurassic Park, some Ninja Turtles. For the most part, I'm a loose action figure collector, but if I can pick up vintage carded figures at the right price, I'll always pick them up. A bit of a mixed bag here. What do we got? We've got some more Hasbro WWF figures that we looked at in a recent video. We've got a big pile of crash test dummies here. We've got just some mixed items here, some Viewmaster stuff, some vintage movie cups. We've got some Pizza Hut Land Before Time toys there that I've got. I've got my Game Boy. We've got some, what do we got? Some Toxic Crusaders that I looked at in a recent video. And in this box here is, I guess, what I want to be the centerpiece of this toy room, and that's my vintage Technodrome. So here's how it all looks now. We've got a lot of work to do. Now let's take a closer look at the shelving unit. So we've got a glass display showcase. We've got 5 shelves here, so I'm yet to decide exactly how I allocate those shelves to different toy lines, but ultimately this is just a start. Once we're done here, we have plenty of room for more shelving units, both on this wall here and this wall here. So I don't want to make this room overcrowded, but I definitely want to try and get a good amount of vintage items on show. And then I also want to populate the room once I'm done with all the vintage toys and vintage pop culture items. I'd like to get some vintage movie posters from the 80s and 90s on the wall, just to help create that, that nostalgic feel. And then we've got this desk here, so I don't anticipate a lot of work to get done in this space. So what I'd like to do here is, I've got an idea to get an old vintage TV, I think they call it a CRT TV, that can play vintage video game consoles, and also a VHS unit, and have some VHS here, so I can just kick back in this room and feel like it's 1989 or 1992. So that's the idea, and now we're going to get started. And once I'm happy with how I've got this unit set up and populated with different vintage toys and pop culture items, I'll share it with you. So we'll see you soon. Okay guys, we are back. And part 1 of converting my study into an 80s and 90s toy room is complete. Now, it's been a few days since I filmed the first part of this video, because setting these figures up has been a reminder of how difficult some of them are to stand. The 1988 Turtles line, the early 90s Hasbro Wwf figures, the Toxic Crusaders down there, the Tyco crash test dummies. Some of these figures are really, really difficult to stand without leaning them against something else. So I started the process, I hit pause, I jumped online and ordered myself some figure bases, some stands, simple clear stands with a peg that peg into holes on the bottom of the figure's feet. But it's been a few days, the stands still haven't arrived. I got impatient and I just resumed the process. Once those stands arrive, I will put them on the figures, and then I'll do a review of the stands and let you know how they're going. But for the time being, everything seems to be okay. Now, we'll take a closer look at what we've got here. Just open up these glass doors, hopefully without any of these guys falling over. Okay, so we've got limited shelving space, and I collect quite a few different toy lines, so I had to make some difficult decisions. But like I mentioned previously, I do plan to get more of these display cabinets. I've got plenty of space in the room for them, and then I can spread these figures out a little bit. So the bottom shelf here, I couldn't decide between dedicating it specifically to my crash test dummies collection or giving the Toxic Crusaders some space here. So, you know, we compromised and we've got a little bit of both here. So there you see my very small but growing collection of Toxic Crusaders that I looked at more closely in a previous video. Here we've got just some of my Tyco crash test dummies. So we've got some of the crash test dummies there in their Protect suits. We've got the junk bots over here. Some of the vehicles, we've got the Crash and Bash chair, which I really like there. I've got some more crash test dummies, which I'm keen to get on display. It's just a matter of space. So once I get the next display cabinet, I can spread these guys out a little bit and I can get some of my other crash test dummies vehicles on display. Now we move up to the next shelf, and this display cabinet just would not be complete without some vintage Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles representation. So on the left here, we've got some of the key heroes. By no means my whole collection, just some of my favorite characters on display there. Now these were the main culprits when it came to difficulty standing up. These guys are so tricky to stand up. The poses and the angles of their limbs just make it really difficult to stand freely. Some of them are lent on the glass there. Some of them won't stand with their accessories, like Casey Jones would not stand with the golf bag on his shoulder, so that had to come off. Now we've got some of my favorite villains there. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles villains to me are just up there with the best of the 90s. I mean, I absolutely love them. We've got some vintage wax packs there, just separating the heroes and villains. Now we move up to the next shelf, which is dedicated to Kenner's The Real Ghostbusters line. Now again, this is not my complete Kenner Real Ghostbusters collection. This is just some of my favorites, some of my favorite series and some of my favorite items from that toy line on show here. We've got the iconic 4 Ghostbusters figures with their proton packs. Another group of figures that I'm really keen to get on stands, because those proton streams can, become a bit of a balancing problem for the figures. And the last thing I want to do is break off any of those streams, because they are tricky to come by, because these are the vintage versions of the figures. I've seen the reissues come out, they're really cool. I mean, if I was more into mint on card figures, I'd definitely scoop them up. But for the most part, I'm a loose vintage action figure collector, and getting my hands on the vintage versions of these figures with all their accessories and piecing them together bit by bit when I'm able to find them, that's part of the fun. So, I tend to prefer the vintage versions of all of the toy lines that I collect as opposed to the reissues. We've got the Ecto 1 there, which was a grail find for me at the start of the year. We've got the Super Fright Features figures there. We've got some of the Haunted Humans that I showed you guys in a recent pickups video. And then we've got some other items here that I really like to collect. So above and beyond toys, I love vintage merch that goes along with these different properties. So we've got either some movie cups there or like fast food promotional cups. I'm not sure where they came from, but that Ghostbusters 2 cup with Vigo the Carpathian there glows in the dark. So that looks awesome once I switch the lights off. We've got a promotional Coke can there. So I'm really happy with how this shelf is looking. And then we move up to the next shelf, which is dedicated to one of my other all-time favorite vintage toy lines, both as a kid and also now as an adult collector. And that's the Hasbro Wwf line. Now again, this is not my complete collection of these figures, just some of my favorite characters and my favorite versions of each character. So there's a number of characters, you know, like Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior and Bret the Hitman Hart and the $1 Million Man Ted DiBiase and the Macho Man Randy Savage, who had multiple figures. So this is my favorite figure per character. Provide a closer look there. I love this toy line. And from a collector's standpoint, I love the fact that a lot of the figures didn't come with accessories. It certainly makes it easier as a collector. And then up the top, we've got the holy grail of my collection, the centerpiece of my collection, and that's the vintage 1990 Technodrome. Now, when I set out to buy the display cabinet, I always wanted the Technodrome to be front and center and to then build out my vintage Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles collection, or display, I should say, around the Technodrome. But unfortunately, I've had a lot of trouble finding a display stand that is deep enough and also has the shelf height to display the Technodrome. And in the end, I gave up and I just bought an affordable, smaller display cabinet to get the room started. So as far as the next display cabinet that I buy, I really want to try and find something that'll fit that Technodrome, because, you know, I don't want it to be really out in the dust, out in the elements for too long. So my next objective for the room is to find a display cabinet that is big enough to fit the Technodrome and some of the other larger items in my collection, like the WWF Hasbro ring, which is too deep for this display cabinet as well. But all in all, I'm really happy with how that's looking. You know, it provides a great starting point for the room. You know, when I walk past the hallway, or when I come down here towards my bedroom or towards the bathroom here, I get a good look at it. So, you know, yeah, it certainly adds something special to the room and really gets the process started. So I'm really happy with it. So there you have it. The process of converting my study or home office into a space that celebrates my nostalgia for the 80s and 90s is now underway. So like I mentioned, it's just a starting point. I'm looking forward to getting more display cases. I'm looking forward to improving the way that I display these vintage toy lines. Right now I'm displaying them probably like I would have displayed them if I was 8 or 9 years old. Just a hodgepodge of my favorite characters. But once I got the space to do it, I want to organize the toy lines and the figures in the order in which they were released. So I'd like to have, you know, all the Wave 1 items together, or have them organized by year. I'll get to all that once I get some more display cabinets. But the next step for me, like I mentioned, is to get a cabinet that's big enough for me to display some of those larger play sets like the Technodrome. And from there, I need to get some more movie posters from the 80s and 90s. I need to get some frames for the vintage movie posters that I already have. I'm keeping my eye out for a vintage TV and some, you know, a VCR and some gaming consoles, so that's going to be fun. But, you know, all in all, I'm really excited to create a space here that feels like, you know, walking into the 80s or into the 90s, you know, when I walk into this room. You know, whether it's escaping, you know, the pressures of work, or whether it's just wanting to put a smile on my face. You know, I'm excited about the process and I'm happy it's underway. But that's it, guys. And the other thing is, I'm happy that I now have a far better backdrop, a more fun backdrop for my videos than the white wall out in my kitchen where I was filming previously. So anyway, that's just a bonus. If you've been watching, I really appreciate it. I appreciate each and every person that watches these videos. I make them primarily for myself, yeah, as a way to sort of indulge in the hobby and as something that I can do when I would normally be attending a toy fair or a collector fair, which at least for the time being are still not going ahead on account of the state of things at the moment. And that's all for me. I really appreciate you watching. I hope you're doing well. If you've got any memories of any of these items behind me, I'd love to hear from you in the form of a comment. If you've got any ideas of other things that I can add to this room, I'm all ears. So thanks again, hope you're doing well, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.